Hello, good evening and welcome to Crawley Borough Council's Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting of the 2nd of September. I'm Councillor Marion Ayling, Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. There are no scheduled fire drills tonight, so in the event of a fire sounding, please leave the building via the main spiral staircase and through the main reception doors. Once outside, please turn left and make your way to the fire assembly point, located beyond the multi-storey car park on Exchange Road. If you are unable to use the stairs, please wait in the council chamber and you will be guided by a member of staff to the evacuation lift. This meeting is being live streamed by the council's YouTube channel. Please note that there are no comment functions available as part of the webcasting. The council is the data controller and will retain the data collected during the webcasting. This will be done so in accordance with the council's published data retention policy. Any members of the public seated in the public gallery should be aware that by entering the chamber, they are consenting to their image being captured by the automated camera system. Recordings will be used for webcasting and or training purposes. Councillors are reminded to take note of what is displayed on the screens in the room, as this shows what is being recorded and webcasted. Cameras are currently set to capture you in a seated position, so please remain seated when speaking. You can request to speak as usual in committees by raising your hand. To speak by pressing the button with the face on it, and the microphones will go green and you will be live. We will now commence with apologies of absence. Have we received any apologies for absence?
Oh, we haven't received it.
Okay, thank you. Disclosure of interest and whipping declarations. Does any member have any disclosure of interest or whipping declarations? Councillor Lanza.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a personal interest on item 8, budget monitoring, as a member of West Sussex County Council.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Now we come to the minutes of the last meeting held on the 23rd of July. Does the Commission agree that the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting? Yeah. Agreed? Thank you. We have no public in attendance, so we will move on. Right, item 5. We will start with the tenants. Oh, are we going to put that one first? We are, aren't we? Yeah. We will start with the tenants' satisfaction measures survey report from Councillor Irvine, Cabinet Member for Housing, Amanda Kendall, Head of Crawley Homes, and Georgina Lee, Crawley Homes Policy and Engagement Manager. This report is not going to Cabinet, however, the Constitution states that the role of OSC is to monitor and review the internal and external delivery and performance of services. Scrutiny can therefore be used to review these functions and monitor council performance. It is important that the Commission scrutinise the tenant satisfaction measures results. Councillor Irvine, can you please introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief because I think, everyone knows what the report's about, and I expect everyone's read it. Just for those who don't know, Amanda Kendall, Head of Crawley Homes, is on my right, and Georgia Lee, Policy and Engagement Manager, who was responsible for the report, is on my left. As you said, Chair, the report is in front of you. We used a third party with a great deal of experience in this type of work to carry out the research and compile the report. It is here to be scrutinised. We welcome any suggestions. I think it's the first time we've done this. We welcome any suggestions, and I think this is the first time this has come in this format to any council committee, and I actually welcome it because it does give us a snapshot of how we're doing it in Crawley homes and what we need to do to try and make things even better for people. And having said that, also I'd like to put on record my thanks to the Tenants and Leaseholders Action Panel, who've done a lot of work behind the scenes on scrutinising this themselves. And sometimes I think, they're there, and us as councillors don't always appreciate that they are there and the amount of work that they do. So with that, I'll pass it over to the committee.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, Amanda.
Thank you. That's okay. Obviously, Councillor Irvine has just set out a bit of background for the report. Georgia's just got a few highlights to give, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. But just setting the scene, it is the first year that we've actually had to do the tenant satisfaction measures, just for the benefit of everybody in the room. It is a requirement under the consumer standards. It would be a breach of the standards if we didn't do this survey. The questions are prescribed, although as Georgia will probably add in a minute, we did add in the option with Acuity, who are the market researcher, to add in a few additional questions that we felt were important. We had a mixed survey method, and overall we're really happy with the results. They've come out as satisfaction generally being in a really good position, particularly when we benchmark against other local authorities and other providers. We're either in the kind of the medium or the top quartile, so that's really good. Yes, there are areas for us to work on. One of those is complaints where satisfaction is lower. And just to put that in context of the next report that you've got coming, the two reports need to be seen with each other really, because there are obviously a number of improvements that we've already got underway and we've already been working on for a number of years with complaints. So just to give a bit of context, I'm just going to hand over to Georgia quickly.
Hi there. Yeah, I'll be brief because I don't know that I've got an awful lot more to add, other than, as Amanda said, just to focus really on the benchmarking and the sort of generally high levels of satisfaction. You'll see from the report that the results are broken down by area, and that some of the areas are experiencing higher levels of dissatisfaction in some areas than others. We picked one of those areas for our neighbourhood inspection recently, went to Gossip's Green, where we had a sort of high proportion of dissatisfaction, particularly around communal areas. And it was interesting to see, and I think worth sort of pointing out the context of this report, in that it's a perception survey that's answered by a proportion of tenants, but actually it held up very well on the doorstep, in that the satisfaction we found on the doorstep was quite a lot higher than would be suggested. But what we were able to do was unpick some of the issues that have come through from the survey. We've broken down area by area. We've met with teams across the council, so including neighbourhood services, our plan maintenance team, our surveyors. We've broken down the results and looked for particular key areas or issues that have come out of the raw data, which isn't presented to you here. And that's been quite an interesting piece of work to see where there's sort of common themes across the board, but where there are sort of more specific issues. And so we're coming up with an area action plan and a sort of map of where particular issues lie. The other thing to note is that we are, this is the report for 23 to 24. We are about to start work on 24 to 25, taking a slightly different approach, where we're going to do 2 tranches so that we can follow up and feedback more regularly, and we can have a more regular sort of monitor of where the land lies. So the results of that will be collated for next year at the end of those two periods, but we'll be able to sort of disseminate and take action on them in the meantime. And are we opening up to questions?
Can you press button now?
Yeah, you're green.
Oh, am I on?
Yes.
Oh, crikey. I thought other people read. I thought it was really, there's a lot there, isn't there? But I like the sampling, first of all, the extensive survey with different methods of doing it, from emails to phones, and I think you covered a lot of ground. I think 7,000 tenants. Not so many leaseholders and shared ownership, I thought, but I suppose that's still kind of a percentage of what you've got generally. But yeah, I don't know where to start, really. I'm glad you mentioned communal areas, because that's a concern, not only communal areas, but rubbish. And I've just, in my 3 months as a councillor, bearing in mind what's happening with the waste panel coming in April 26, what Crawley homes are going to be doing in terms of looking at antisocial behaviour related to communal areas and rubbish cupboards as well.
Food as well.
And obviously with food waste coming up. So that was quite interesting to see there were concerns on that. Interesting, the page on keeping properties in good repair. Pound Hill seemed to be mentioned quite a few. And obviously probably, I was wondering if that's something to do with the actual contract, or is that where because of the homes, where the homes are situated? Because obviously you've got some in Pound Hill North, you've got some in Pound Hill South as well, and in Councillor Lanz's ward as well. So I was quite interested in why they kept cropping up. So I'm just, I was slightly concerned about that, whether it's a particular contract or the contractors, because you don't really go into the different contractors, and obviously I assume it's consistent across the piece, but that's obviously would be my first area of concern. And it's interesting, community areas do mention bin stores and rubbish, and and in terms of particular concerns, although I've been in a council a few months, I knew mould was a problem, and I was wondering what kind of preventive action we're going to be taking for next winter. What else was I going to say? We'll talk about complaints handling in a while, but on the whole, I think, it was good. 75% satisfaction is good. I think you know what the key areas are. We'll come on to complaints a bit longer. And the only thing you said benchmarking is reasonably good performance when compared to the whole sector. How would I know that? Would I have to go elsewhere to find those kind of figures?
So in the sort of latter part of the report, there's a couple of benchmarking charts. One is for benchmarking. This is just for acuity clients, so so it's not representative of the whole of the UK. But amongst acuity clients, they've benchmarked us with the overall picture, so including housing associations as well, and then they've benchmarked us with councils.
Yeah, I did see that. I didn't quite understand it, actually.
Yeah.
It's one of those visuals that you don't, if you're not familiar with those kind of graphs, you get a bit slightly confused.
So against local authorities, we fare in the top quartile for most areas. Our scores for where things are lower for antisocial behaviour and complaints is sort of very consistent in general with the national picture. We are exploring other means of benchmarking, and we will have access to Housemarque's benchmarking, which will cover a much bigger range of a much greater range of landlords to compare against. And I think they have released some sort of initial figures. You have to pay to have the full report, which is I believe we're down that route now already, aren't we, Amanda, joining Housemarque? But our performance seemed to fare pretty well against their Housemarque figures.
I think Amanda wants to come back.
Yeah, that's all right. Sorry, I was just making a list of your questions, because you did have a number of those. Just on the communal areas, and Georgia referenced the spilling out in Gossips Green recently, and again, the communal spaces issue did come through, a lot about weeds and weed control and kind of upkeep of perhaps communal kind of grassed areas. You know, we do know that that is an issue across the borough in our stock, and it's something we hear regularly from residents. There has been a project with neighbourhood services over the last 12 to 18 months where we've been mapping out all of our areas, identifying all of Crawley homes, communal spaces. We're working on the service level agreement neighbourhood services on that and looking at what the recharge to the HRA currently is against what it should be. And then Georgia and I will do some consultation with tenants, setting out what the existing cost is there anything more that residents want, etc., and enforcing the service level agreement. That will also translate into service charges for tenants, because currently tenants actually don't pay anything for grounds maintenance. So there will be a change that we will propose, and we'll obviously work with Councillor Irvine around what a strategy for the service charge looks like for residents, because obviously they'd be going from having no service charge to having a service charge. And are tenants happy to pay for that? Do they want something more elevated? We do know that some sites would actually like something more. And it might be that we go down the route eventually of having maybe a bronze, silver, gold standard, depending on what people want. But that will require a lot of work. So we're just trying to get, at the minute, the service level agreement right. And what does that translate for service charges? You also mentioned about fly tipping. As Crawley Homes, we are seeing a lot more of that. We are seeing a lot more of that in our bin stores, in communal areas. And again, that is a cost to the HRA, and we need to look at, again, how does that translate into service charges. But we are very aware, we're monitoring it, we're getting the data together for it. We know that that's an area that residents are quite passionate about as well. They want to live in nice neighbourhoods, and we want them to live in nice neighbourhoods too. So we have got plans to get on top of these things. You talk about waste and food waste. Of course, we'll get on board with, particularly in blocks of flats, food waste. I've done it before in previous authorities. It is actually quite easy to do, as long as you're getting residents on board with enough notice, and really kind of getting them in and thinking ahead of what it means for them and how they change their kind of waste and recycling habits. You also brought up Pound Hill. Georgia, from the raw data, I don't think we've got any particular schemes where it's jumping out at us that there are problems. We suspected that it might be in Milton Mount, for example, where we have done a lot of work with residents, and we know at times that maybe they've not been unhappy, whether that might be with the work that we're doing because of the cost of it, or ASB issues in the block. I'll let Georgia come back on that in a minute. And then you also ask about damp and mould and what things we're doing ahead of the winter. We have got task teams in place, multidisciplinary task teams, so that is across both our housing maintenance team, plan maintenance team and housing management team. It includes financial inclusion officers, so they'll all be working as a team, particularly on really difficult cases where we're finding it hard to resolve. We're also looking at other technologies that we can perhaps bring in. So, for example, infrared heating. We've seen some really innovative solutions, and we know that landlords in London, for example, who have had really difficult cases that they cannot resolve, they cannot find a root cause, have used some of these new techniques really successfully to eliminate damp and mould. So we're looking at that, and also our housing management system. We're about to go live with the workflow on that, which will help automate a lot of our processes, make sure there's follow-up actions, etc., and that we can monitor everything that's happening through the system, because our aim has been to make sure we are using Activate to its absolute maximum capacity. And I think that was all your questions, and I'll just hand over to Georgia, who might be able to give some more insight on the data for Pound Hill.
Hi there. Yeah, I don't have the specific breakdowns in front of me for this meeting, but at Pound Hill there is most definitely a sort of spike in terms of dissatisfaction about certain things at Milton Mount, but I think it would be a mistake to assume it's just Milton Mount. There are across the board where we've got the airport courts, Javelin Court, names escape me of the others at the moment. There's those. It's the levels of dissatisfaction are mainly seen in the blocks, as you know, as you sort of identify, and I think issues around antisocial behaviour and the bin stores. We've done some, like I say, had some initial meetings around the areas, and I can share the information with councillors if people wanted to explore a bit further and wanted to get in touch. Then that we can sort of draw out those particular issues area by area.
Could you just come back? Yeah, that's really good. We've been working. I mean, Councillor Russ have been working with residents in the aircraft courts quite extensively, and I should also, on a final kind of positive line, give a bit of a plug to Crawley Homes, because at the plant room outside Milton Mount, in conjunction with the head gardener at Milton Mount, there's been some really nice rewilding been done, and it looks really, it looks really nice, really good, and you know, it's obviously that's a brand new plant room, and just not to have a blank wall and have really nice flowers and wild plants there, which should be left 2-3 years. It looks really good, and it shows the high standards Crawley Homes has for their tenants and the community areas. So well done on that.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the report. I guess I've had the benefit of you giving me a comprehensive overview prior to this meeting. But the issues that I come across are certainly in relation to the communal areas. And I think if we get the communal areas right, it might help in terms of an awful lot of how the look and feel of all the residents are. But it also might help with antisocial behaviour as well, and the issues that we have with some of that, and certainly, you know, cleaning and all other issues that come alongside that. But there was a couple of, as well as the damp and mould issues, which again I've had quite a number of complaints about. Do we actually have a mechanism where somebody goes out to check the quality of the work? Because I guess sometimes we get ongoing complaints that come off the back of that. And also, I just wanted to know what the resident engagement conference is, and how we can use that to our advantage. Thank you.
I'll come in first and then I'll just hand over to Georgia. So in terms of the quality of work, each contractor has their own supervisor that will be going out and checking aspects of work. Currently, Crawley Homes don't have the resource to do that themselves, so there's not a lot that we post-inspect currently, unless we perhaps say get a complaint in or we have a resident asking for a follow-up where we'll do an inspection. But Crawley Homes had a growth item last year, and we're currently still in the process of implementing that new structure. And in that new structure, it will allow for more opportunity to post-inspect a percentage of work and performance monitor the contractor. The other thing is, and also included as part of that growth bid, is our stock condition surveys. Now, although that won't be going out specifically to post-inspect work, it will ensure that over a 3 to 4 year cycle, we're getting in every property undertaking a stock condition survey, looking at issues in the property, both planned and picking up day-to-day responsive issues that will be passed over to that team. And that will also include, if there's been recent work, kind of inspecting the quality of the work, as well as also marrying up the compliance side. So what we're also doing with that is checking all the compliance certification is in place at the same time, which is hugely important. Okay, I'll just hand over to Georgia then for the engagement conference.
Yes, so the plan for the resident engagement conference was twofold, really. It was to be able to have a means of disseminating the results of the TSM survey to residents and updates on our performance in general around the other performance measures that Crawley collects, but also the management tenant satisfaction measures, which are our performance around compliance and so on. So we wanted to have those have to be published online, and we'll be publishing them online, but we wanted to have an opportunity for tenants to come and ask us about them, to hear. So we have Acuity, who did the survey for us, are coming down to facilitate a workshop around that. The other sort of main thrust was that we wanted to culminate the work we've been doing around resident engagement and the feedback we've been receiving from TLAP. We wanted to sort of unveil the proposed resident engagement strategy, to sense check that with residents more widely, find out what ways people particularly want to be involved. With the strategy sets out sort of number of ranges and means, and we wanted to get an idea from tenants about where we should be investing the most resource, really, in terms of consulting people. We plan to have a sort of plenary session with just general updates. We are using the opportunity to have sessions on information about council housing more generally. So yes, the plan is to take place between 10 and 2:30 with a lunch. And we're inviting residents to take part in primarily really about information about where we're at, what we're doing, and to ask questions and to invite invite opinion about where we should go and whether we're going in the right place. So the plan is to have some plenary sessions, a lunch session with advice and stands and perhaps other providers, but also to have 6 workshops.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies for being late. No, I don't have interest to declare. Thank you.
Hi, yes, so residents had the option to give us their details if they wanted to, and to say whether they're happy for us to contact them if we wanted to. We are still working our way through those, but where the surveys flagged up particular concerns, so anything around sort of safeguarding, significant issues around property condition, damp and mould particularly, those were flagged up and triaged as we went along, so they've been part of the damp and mould work that the team have been doing. Area by area, the plan is to revisit the damp and mould cases, to check back on the upshot and the outcome of what's happened since, but also to get back to particular customers who are dissatisfied about particular sticking issues or matters that at the time were unresolved, and to do some customer recovery around what we can do better, what's happened since the survey. But we're still working through. There's, as you can understand, there's some considerable records to go through, but the plan is definitely to go directly to customers where they've raised concern and they've given us permission. And in most cases, sort of well over 90% of cases, people are giving us permission to do that.
Thank you for presenting the report. Oh no, sorry, I've said that bit. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lanza.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report, which I think in part is a really useful product from the Housing Association Scrutiny Panel recommendations, if anything. I just wanted to ask on contact method preferences, because we as a council obviously encourage online transactions. I can understand, though, the specific detail around housing queries and indeed complaints people might prefer to use other channels, but it's quite striking how few people have a preference of using self-service online. It's 11%, and whereas perhaps for other services that would be much higher. I'm wondering if we have a feeling for why that is. Is it perhaps to do with sometimes the complexity of an inquiry, or is it to do with the lack of online capability that we have in this area of the council, or is it a combination of both? And then looking a little bit further on, there's a kind of age related chart, age satisfaction, and if I'm reading this correctly, there's a kind of there's more of a satisfaction kind of deficit in the younger age groups, and it's quite striking how linear this graph is, where you kind of get the impression that in the youngest age groups, possibly expectations are a good deal higher and are not being perceived to be met as much. And then you transition to the later age groups, 55 plus, where there's much more of a positive trend on satisfaction. I just found that quite interesting. And then when we look at the benchmarking, on both benchmarking charts, I think as to be expected, we see that complaints handling has the lowest level of satisfaction, and we'll come to that later. But I do think there's a point here that with complaints handling, people can be highly sensitised to subsequent actions of the council, by the initial handling of their complaint, what we'll refer to as stage 1 complaint in a later report. And when we look at these two charts, these are acuity clients, and I think I'm right in saying one is acuity clients, housing associations and councils combined, and one is not. One is councils only. When we look at the quartile performance, and there's been remarks made about the council being in the top quartile, and when you look at councils alone, that is indeed the case. We're quite often in the top quartile. Sometimes we're a little bit above the median for communal areas and positive contribution to neighbourhood. But when you broaden it out and you look at the comparison with other councils and housing associations, then our performance is more like the median than the upper quartile, with some exceptions like treating people fairly and with respect, where we're still upper quartile. But it's just interesting how the performance looks different on the two graphs, varying from a lot of performance in the upper quartile, but on the other graph, performance more aligned with the median than the upper quartile. So I just wondered if I could had some comments on those observations, please.
Just in terms of contact method, yes, there might be a point in terms of the ability and what people can do online. Obviously, part of our Active Age project, and we're well into phase 2 now, part of phase 2 is to open up the online portal where people will be able to, or tenants will be able to log repairs, look at their rent account. So kind of feelings about online activity might change with that. But, you know, it is an interesting point, isn't it, around contact preference, because, you know, it is cheaper for the council and for people to do things online, but actually what our tenants say to us is that they like to engage with us in person, over the phone. You know, yes, part of that might be around the complexity of issues sometimes that you can't convey in an email or put in an online form. So I think that is a really good point. And we have seen that a lot of the cases that we deal with are becoming more and more complex. So, you know, I do think there is something there, but we do need to listen to what our residents are telling us. The regulator of social housing expects that. They expect us to provide a service that our residents are saying that they want. So we do need to reflect on what that looks like. But obviously we will track what happens with Activate and the online portal and see what difference that makes to satisfaction come when that's live and the next time we do this survey and ask these questions. Satisfaction with younger age groups, perhaps Georgia might have some more insight on that, but I do know that we find it more difficult to engage in some of the activities that we're doing with younger people, so that might well influence what we're seeing. In terms of benchmarking, I think that's a difficult one in terms of where we sit in the overall picture. I think we just have to remember that this is acuity clients, just acuity clients and not anything wider. So I think, you know, we'll probably reserve judgment on that until we see sector-wide results. But, you know, we do know, for example, for Crawley Homes, that perhaps on the plan side, it's been more reactive than proactive. Maybe that's part of the way that people feel about the service that we provide. In recent years, we haven't done a lot around asking tenants their opinion or kind of fully engaging people. Maybe that's reflecting in what we're seeing. And now that we've got a whole team that is focused on that, maybe we'll start seeing a difference. You know, we do know that people really value that we're out in their community. We've had several community events. We had an Estates Week earlier in the year where we were out looking at estates, talking to people. We've just had our event in Gossips Green. We know anecdotally from that, whilst we're collating all the evidence, and Georgia referenced it earlier, that actually what we're hearing on the doorstep feels different to what is coming through in the survey. So, but our plans are to carry on with those kind of events and understand that more. And Georgia, do you want to add anything more?
Yeah, only on the age really. I think it's a sort of pretty consistent picture that older people tend to be more satisfied in surveys like this. But I would add that although age is very clearly marked there, And I was just scrolling through the presentation again to see if it's in here. Something that is a significant factor is tenure. And so a lot of our younger people might be more likely to live in blocks of flats, for example, whose satisfaction scores tend to be lower. They may also, and this is we'd have to unpick this rather than assume it's a judgment, but I suppose the point I'm making is there's other factors at play. They may also be struggling more with cost of living, and there is a chart in the presentation that suggests that if people are struggling with the cost of living, particularly household bills and food, if they're struggling with that, then they're likely to be a good 10% less satisfied on the whole. So I think, although age is most distinctly a factor, and it is quite eye-popping, I think if you're under 44, you're considerably less happy across a lot of areas. The other factors are possibly also impacting those figures in terms of where people are likely to live and how they're likely to experience services more generally.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the report. It makes absolutely fascinating reading. It was nice to see the level of satisfaction that was being displayed. I had a couple of fairly quick questions. You mentioned you did some work on the doorstep. Presumably that was a triangulation to try and make sure that results weren't skewed with certain types of responses. And did that actually mean that you were literally knocking on doors and speaking to people directly? That was one of them. There was also mention of an action plan. I don't know if I've missed it or it's in there, or if that's something that is about to be drawn up, or whether in the future that might be shared with us at the committee. I would just be interested in that. And I was fascinated about the idea of the gold, silver and bronze possible standards for service level agreements and what might go on. I'd be intrigued to see how that develops, because you could end up with a situation where a majority vote for something that's more expensive and the minority aren't happy paying it. But those were just a few observations, and again, thank you, an absolutely fascinating report.
Yeah, the gold, silver, bronze, it will be an interesting one. Obviously, it would end up being site-specific. We need to consider how we resource that. Obviously, the first step is that we just need to get the service charge in place and work with Councillor Irvine around what that looks like and the strategy for that. But, we do know that there will be areas, for example, we've been out of Deerswood Court, and, we know that they would like something specific there, and what does that look like? So, we might start on small scale to test it out and see, how that works, how happy residents are, and then how we can translate that across the stock. But that will be an interesting one. In terms of an action plan, Georgia and her team have been working with other members of the senior management team and with their teams, just unravelling the results. What does it mean from those, or any other surprise? Are there things that we can take away? We are also working with the contractors. We've already had an initial meeting with them, setting out both the complaints action plan and the tenant satisfaction measures. All the contractors have been asked to go away from that initial meeting, come back with some ideas, and we've got follow-up meetings where we're going to, for example, with Waits and Mears, because they have opposite sides of the borough, focus very much in on each neighbourhood that they're looking after. What is it that they can bring? Are there any kind of social value commitments that might come out of what we're seeing? One of those, for example, we've been talking about today's drying areas. Waits, for example, are very keen on doing a project around that and how we can kind of improve satisfaction through improving some of those kind of communal areas. In terms of door knocking, Georgia, do you want to comment a bit more on that?
Yes, the going out to Gossip's Green, we divided the entire area up, and we did attempt to knock at every door, and if somebody wasn't in, then we left a feedback, we left a sheet saying why we were there and offering the invitation to feedback. So yes, the idea was to sort of reach Gossip's Green in its entirety as far as we can. We chose to do that in the summer holidays, which was a sort of deliberate choice in the hope that we'd find more people at home, because I think a lot of the issue with reaching some of the younger people is they're more likely to be working. And so we were hoping to coincide with the school holidays, but that has its drawbacks in that some people would be out for that reason as much as they like to be in. Didn't necessarily go to sense check the TSM results as such, because it's the singular method of being on the doorstep. So, and people do tend to be more satisfied when they're talking to you directly, face to face. Anyway, I think it was more that we wanted to. We do these big neighbourhood events each year, and Gossip Screen's an area we hadn't been to, and because it fared sort of relatively low in some areas, and we'd already done quite a lot of work with Milton Mount, particularly over in Pound Hill. We selected Gossip Screen for that, but we do the neighbourhood. We do neighbourhood inspections every month. So the plan would be to have snapshots of the results from those and unpick those with those areas. But yes, the purpose of going to Gossip Screen really was to it was the area that we selected, and one of the reasons we selected was based on the TSM results.
It's not a follow-up. I just want to say thank you, because it's absolutely brilliant, the level of thought that's gone into that. And we've been to some of the residential things that you've done in Pound Hill, and that you've actually thought to go to Gossip Screen because they haven't had one of those. It's just brilliant. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the report. Just some questions about your antisocial behaviour. Satisfaction is below the 60% at 55%. Just a few questions on that. What do you think we could do to improve this? Additionally, do the process we have currently in place, do you think it's fit for purpose? And often we find in cases of antisocial behaviour, there's a lot of repeat offenders. What do we do to tackle repeat offenders in such a situation?
I'm going to let Georgia come in on the data in a minute, because it's interesting, this one, because we can only ask the question in the prescribed way. And Georgia, you'll come in, but I think some of the people that are saying that they've had ASB haven't actually reported it through formal channels, but I'll let you comment a little bit more on that, Georgia. But in terms of, is what we're doing fit for purpose? We're about to go live with our new antisocial behaviour policy. That has been out to public consultation, so we very much have got residents' feedback. But it's really interesting. We do ongoing satisfaction surveys as well within the ASB service. Actually, what comes back from that is really positive, but actually it's only the people that are happy with the outcome that are replying to those. So of course the results are going to be positive, and the people that are less happy are because we haven't been able to take any more robust enforcement, and that's because there isn't the evidence, because there is a high threshold for the evidence to move forward formally. And often that's what residents are unhappy with, the fact that we can't take formal enforcement, but we can't do it if there isn't enough evidence. And residents do sometimes find that really frustrating. So I'm satisfied, and all the cases that I see, for example, if I get involved with them through members' inquiries or complaints, I'm satisfied that we are doing what we need to be doing. Last year, so not 23-24, but in the year before, we did have an ASB complaint that went to the Housing Ombudsman, and they didn't find any maladministration, so that was also reassurance, which was good. So I'm quite satisfied with doing what we need to. I think, again, this is a perception survey, and no matter if we feel that we've come to the right conclusion and the right outcome, the resident may not be happy with that because they wanted us to do something more robust, but there simply may not be the evidence to do that. Georgia?
Yeah, I can come back in on that. So yes, as Amanda said, the antisocial behaviour question is asked in that prescribed format to everybody. The flavour of that really, with this survey and with the feedback that we had from the policy consultation, was around, pretty much in a nutshell, what Amanda's just described, was the issues around evidence. So the expectations around how we handle antisocial behaviour are very high. They want action taken straight away, and they want that action to be, often in the severest of forms. I mean, not always the case, but what people do struggle with is keeping evidence diaries and making note. And we have been looking at other ways of doing that, haven't we, Amanda, with the sort of noise recording equipment we use, and whether there's more flexibility. And I think the team are very flexible in how they work with people to gather evidence. So we did stress in the policy, from off the back of the feedback, we stressed in the policy the things that the team can do to support in the gathering of evidence, but we did also stress that it's very difficult to take action without that. We made it very clear in the policy that enforcement action isn't the place that we will automatically go. We're not able to do that. It's our responsibility to work with all parties to reach a solution to the issue. the antisocial behaviour team have taken the TSM results and they're doing a lot of work as a team around what they could do differently, what they could do better. They're doing some quite interesting training work where they take on different hats as different members of people with an interest in antisocial behaviour and work things through from that perspective. So they've come up with quite a lot of ideas about how they might be able to improve their service, and they have introduced a regular feedback survey. So putting all those things together, I think the same with everything with the TSM results, is it's sort of putting it all together with the bigger picture. The last point I'd make, I think, is that a lot of the antisocial behaviour issues are sort of societal issues, really. They're not necessarily ones that we can manage alone, and so and require a good partnership working with the police. And we have really good feedback from the police about how we work with them. But the issues are primarily around drug use, cannabis use specifically, and sort of presence of youths in buildings. I think something that we can definitely make an impact with in terms of, and it's come very strongly through the TSMs, is around communal safety and security. I think sometimes people feel that the security of their block, that the antisocial behaviour issues wouldn't be present if the security was better. And so our electrical mechanical surveyors doing an audit of all of the intercom systems and the door entry systems to make sure that those are fit for purpose, because what tends to happen is they get broken, and that enables people into the building. That makes people feel more frightened and more conscious of antisocial behaviour. So there's lots of work in progress in response to that, and also in response to the new policy and the feedback we had.
Just to reiterate that point about being flexible, I've absolutely seen examples of that through complaints and through my work with some of the residents, where the team, although they're not required to be on standby, they are very flexible about saying to residents that they will go out into the evening to listen to ASB. They won't just limit it to office hours. For example, there'd been a complex case with a woman with disabilities who was really struggling to manage any evidence, and they agreed with that lady that up till a reasonable time at night that they would come out and witness that if the resident wanted it. So absolutely support what Georgina is saying. The team are incredibly flexible and going above and beyond. We've got one of our ASB officers who is actually also a football coach, and he is looking to see actually how he can engage younger people to participate in other activities that might prevent some of the ASB we're seeing. So they are really trying to be creative, and I would absolutely second what George is saying. Other things that the team are doing, they're all trained in shuttle mediation, so they will liaise between complainant and perpetrator to try and move issues forward. We also, in the last few years, have implemented other means of collecting evidence, and we do have a lot of our customers that use the ASB app, for example. George has referenced that we've got sound recording equipment. We've recently looked at other devices that we could possibly use. So I'm satisfied that the team are doing all that they can and thinking really creatively.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. So obviously, like others have said, it's a really high quality report, and as others have also said, there's quite a lot in here, so I'm not by any means saying there should be even more, but I would just be curious to see, will we ever be able to get access to the raw data for this and see things like breakdown by other protected characteristics that maybe aren't mentioned? And then the second question is, so Council Lands have actually already asked a lot of it, but obviously the age discrepancy was quite striking, and I understand that there might be other factors at play, but I was quite surprised to see that it wasn't one of the recommendations coming out of the report to see if we can address that age discrepancy. And I was just wondering if there are plans to dig deeper into it and see that even if you allow for those other factors that we mentioned earlier, if there is an age discrepancy, and if so, a plan to deal with it.
So obviously Acuity have just mentioned some quite generic recommendations, and the report is very much for us as the landlord to go away and decide what it is that we want to do the data. I think in terms of the raw data, so the survey is supposed to be anonymous, as Georgia mentioned earlier, where residents were flagging up issues. They were asked if they wanted to share the data with the landlord. I think, we wouldn't necessarily share the raw data more widespread than that, but I think if there is something that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee would like to know, then certainly when we undertake the tenant satisfaction survey this year, so as Georgia mentioned earlier, we're doing 2 tranches this year. When it comes back to Overview and Scrutiny again, if there's something that you'd like to know, then we would certainly be happy to break it down for you. You know, in Acuity, we've worked with them really well, and in terms of kind of taking a deeper dive into the data, they're very happy to work with us with anything else that we want, or equally, you know, we can do that deep dive ourselves. So if there's anything specifically members would like to know, we can certainly take that forward, because actually today we've entered into our first discussion for what the survey this year will look like. So if there's anything that members want to us to take forward, we're more than happy to hear.
Just to add to that, we do have those breakdowns available, so if you're particularly interested to have that information about breakdowns by other protected characteristics, we have breakdowns by, we certainly have breakdowns by ethnicity, and I'm not sure if we have breakdowns for disability, but we certainly have ethnicity breakdowns if those would be useful to see. And we can probe the raw data to find what we would need to find.
Thank you very much. Very detailed and very presented report. My question is about the area I represent, Langley Green. It got one of the, I think, lowest satisfaction score, which is in line with the sort of feedback I get from the residents. And normal, topic which comes up is the time scale it takes to, to fix the repairs. Is it something to do with the nature or number of properties there, or are there any other factors in play here? Thank you.
Just in terms of timescales for repairs, we look at that every month with the contractors, and actually they're doing very well. Their performance is really good. We also look at their aged WIP, and Councillor Irvine gets that every month as well. And an aged WIP is any job that's over 28 days, and this is for responsive repairs. So we look at all that data. In terms of what we're seeing in Langley Green, obviously overall the satisfaction is quite high. I think we probably need to drill down on the data a little bit more just to understand are there any kind of hot spots in terms of timescales specifically? Georgia, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I think that would certainly come from the work we're doing by contractor, because then we'll be looking specifically area by area at particular issues and repair timescales. So that information will be drilled down much further when we come to working that through. I couldn't comment about Langley Green and the level of satisfaction overall. I would have to go back to the raw data, but I can provide more information if you'd like more information about what the main issues are there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a very interesting meeting and very stimulating. A lot of my questions have been answered, but there is one that I will come on to. On the whole, the report is very honest, and I'm so pleased to see that in that report we have mentioned our own shortcomings, and I know that we will improve on those because we do as a council. I trust us. And it's good to see that there are ideas for that in the future. There's one thing talking about sorting out. Once upon a time, we used to have satisfaction cards that were given out by the workmen to the customers, but I'm not sure if that continues now. But anyway, I do trust that 75% satisfaction rate will improve, because I personally think that's not good enough for us at the moment, although colleagues on the left seem to think it is. But I'm sure you agree that you want it to be up in the 80s. So I see that that's what you want. Now, we talked about comparison between the landlords on the first page. That really caught my attention because I know that we work with other landlords. They're our partners, for want of a better word. So if they come, if I say these reports from the various associations, I'm presuming that if, say, they come below par and they don't come up to our standard, how can we encourage them to improve so that we work to a higher standard across the board? I know that we do encourage working with landlords that have a particular level. Am I right? We still do that, don't we? So how can we make sure that our partners work at a higher standard that we are happy with and that satisfies us and that will make us, keep us all together working for the good of our tenants? That's it.
Thank you. As I said earlier, the tenant satisfaction measures is a requirement now under the consumer standards. All providers are required to do it, and it is part of the methodology that the regulator of social housing is using to decide who they're going to inspect and when. So it will be the regulator that looks in more detail at these results, and they will explore them in their regulatory inspections. They'll explore what they're finding. They will test and quiz landlords in more detail. So the role that I see is for the regulator here, although clearly we would like to benchmark with people in our, or other landlords in our local area to see how we're performing. But it's absolutely the role of the regulator to take forward what's happening here, and they're giving providers scores, C1, C2, C3, based on what is coming out, not just at the satisfaction measures, but the whole range across the consumer standards. And they will be looking to those landlords to put in place improvement plans, and they will be monitoring them.
Can I come back? So are we saying that they will report back to us, or we will see the report, or how will we know that anyone we are working with has deteriorated or has improved, let's say? How do we treat that? I'm not explaining very well, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So all the inspection results, as Georgia referenced earlier, tenant satisfaction measures, they're not, we've had to upload them to the regulator. The regulator hasn't published them in full yet. We do expect that at some point, and like Georgia said, we're going to try and get into Housemark and do some more benchmarking ourselves, but again, that will only be with Housemark clients. But in terms of inspection results, again, like I've said, the tenant satisfaction measures are one of the things that the regulator will look at as part of the inspection process. Inspection results are available on gov.uk. So if you go onto gov.uk, you can start to see them becoming available. There are some local ones that are on there already, including, for example, Brighton and Hove, who've already had their regulatory inspection. So they're available online. It says what the regulator has found. Some of them reference tenant satisfaction measures. So, for example, there's a grading for Guildford Borough Council, and it expressly references the fact that Guildford Borough Council didn't undertake their tenant satisfaction measures, and that's part of the reason for the rating that they've been given. But there is a whole host of complex reasons around that. So on gov.uk, I'm very happy to share the link where you can have a look at that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, and thank you for an interesting meeting, and thank you to doing the report. I think you've done an excellent job. It must take a lot of hard work. Thank you.
So we move on to the recommendation. I move that the Commission is requested to receive this report, consider the progress to date and acknowledge any further service actions. I ask the Vice Chair to second, please.
Yes, I second that.
Thank you. Right, move on now to item 6. We will move on to Crawley Homes Annual Complaints Performance and Service Improvement Report and Satisfactory Complaints Handling Code Report, also from Ian Irvine, Amanda and Georgia.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank all members for their comments on the previous report. And if you make a comment sometimes at the Overview Scrutiny Commission, you may think that it's not been heard or maybe it will be ignored or whatever, but then a little bit further down the line, suddenly you'll find that what you suggested actually happens, although you may not necessarily get credit for it. And actually, that's not my original observation. I may have thought that, but it was actually Councillor Lanza that said that once at a previous Overview Scrutiny Commission a few years ago. But I do agree with what he said. Again, as with the other report, I actually welcome this report. I have two missions in my mind as Cabinet Member for Housing, and the first of those missions is that I play my part in trying to ensure that Crawley Homes is an absolutely first-class housing authority, and I think we're on our way to becoming first class, and this type of information actually assists us in that journey. So I personally don't think that complaints are necessarily always a bad thing. Sometimes complaints can be a good thing, and that it highlights issues and it gives an organisation a chance to respond, put things right, and put itself in a good light and improve for the future. So this is the first time we've presented this report because we are statutorily now required to do so. But with that, Chair, I'll pass it over and see if Amanda or George have any additional comments, and if not, welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you, Councillor Irvine. Absolutely second what Councillor Irvine is saying about complaints being a good thing. They are, because that's the way we look at improving services. Where are we falling down? Where are we going wrong? But equally, what is good about services? All of these things give us insight into where we need to focus. We have been reporting our compliance against the Complaint Handling Code to the Housing Ombudsman for several years now, but this is the first year where the code is actually statutory and where there is a requirement to present the results of our analysis to what's referred to as the Executive Committee, which in this circumstance becomes Cabinet. So obviously this is the journey of the report to Cabinet and the sign-off that way. We have been doing work against complaints for a number of years now. TLAP, so the Tenant and Leaseholder Action Panel, have been scrutinising complaints anonymously for at least 18 months now, and that is really insightful, and we've made a number of changes already as a result of that. Myself and colleagues of the senior management team, we regularly hold workshops with staff, and we've had an action plan in place against the code for some time now. What the annual report and action plan does is just bring all of those strands together into one action plan. And Georgia, is there anything else that you'd like to say on the report?
I'll go first. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I thought generally a very, very good report again. I think I quite like section 4 when on the one hand you say there's only 300 complaints out of 30,000 jobs, and on the other hand you're saying every complaint is important, it's a nuisance to some people, and it needs resolving. And obviously there's some areas, particularly in terms of stage 1, where because of issues with surveyors and stuff, you need to make some improvements in keeping to those particular deadlines. I think what really comes out though is the role of TLAB, the Tenants Leaseholders Action Panel. They've obviously worked extremely hard at various points, and it looks like they do go through a lot of detail, and I don't think I think they should be thanked. I think as our committee, OSC could perhaps thank them for their work in contributing towards the work they've got. One interesting thing I'm quite interested in is this thing about financial incentives, and particularly as the TLAP themselves said, they thought it was variable and sometimes excessive. And you wonder, when you look at how complaints are dealt with, what the aim of the resolution is, and obviously it's to resolve the particular problems. And I noticed that you're suggesting that at stage 1, you should perhaps offer financial incentives there, but that kind of doesn't tie up with what TLAP is saying, because I would like some kind of, not audit, but some kind of overseeing at the customer handling stage, initial complaint handling stage, to make sure that we are giving the right financial incentives and the most appropriate ones. Because if they're not appropriate, we should be giving financial, not incentives, what's the word I'm looking for? Compensation, sorry. So, yeah, I was quite interested by the TLAP things, and just generally in terms of the different systems TLAP have got involved with as well. You know, dummy appointments, for instance, and looking at, and also the need for training as well. So they've obviously done a lot of work. But again, it's not a bad thing to have complaints in a way, and it's the way they're resolved and the outcome of them, which is important. And I think the very serious ones, we have been accused of maladministration when they've gone to the Housing Ombudsman. So at the very tip, that shows as enough Crawley Homes is in good working order.
Thank you. So yeah, just on the point of compensation, I mean, look, this is a really tricky one, and it's really obvious sometimes from the outset of a complaint that that is what somebody's looking for. And we sometimes do see that as a reason for complaints escalating. People don't just want an apology, but sometimes it's genuinely where people have had their own financial loss and then they're therefore looking for compensation for us. Now, we do see this at stage 2. I've seen it several times this year where somebody's looking for financial redress from us because they've actually lost personal possessions and they haven't got home contents insurance, and therefore they think it's unfair that we're not doing something. In other cases, people think that they shouldn't have to pay the excess on their home insurance if there was a problem that we were held to account for, which is a fair point. So in some instances, I have agreed to pay the excess for somebody. Now, there have been a couple of cases where TLAP have maybe said that the compensation given is maybe on the higher end. I can think of a case where I gave approximately £1,000 compensation to a resident, but it was it was actually based on some advice from our legal team, who felt that there was actually a justified case for disrepair, and actually if that escalated further, we would probably be looking for more. The compensation would be far higher in the courts, which is why sometimes the compensation might be on a higher end, because there is perhaps a more serious issue at play that we're trying to avert in the case, for example, I've given of disrepair. But it's certainly not the first resort, and even sometimes when people are asking for financial compensation, even at stage 2, I'm not giving it if I don't think there's any merits of doing so. Whenever somebody is closing down a complaint, including myself, we have to say whether there was any compensation given and what the amount was. Sometimes compensation might not be actual money to somebody. It might be, I've also given it where I've given fuel vouchers, for example, because we had a case where somebody felt that they were in a passive house and they didn't think it was working effectively. It was, but actually they were struggling themselves financially and hadn't really considered the cost of inflation with their own fuel bills. But actually the outcome of that complaint was that I recognised that they were having some financial difficulty, and the outcome was that I gave them some fuel vouchers that we had through HSF4. So it isn't always that we're paying out in money. There can be other ways that we can help as well through, like I say, fuel vouchers or whatever. But Georgia is currently finalising a new compensation policy that will set out clear guidance to our staff about when, how, values to pay. And actually, even if somebody asks for compensation, that's not always the right avenue if we don't feel it's the right course. It's about whether the evidence stacks up. But we also know we did have one maladministration case this year where actually we didn't uphold the complaint, but actually the Housing Ombudsman found that there had been maladministration in terms of building defects on a new build house and awarded nearly £1,500 in compensation. Now, the amounts that the Housing Ombudsman are awarding are quite significant. I think £1,500 is about the biggest that we've had, but I've seen in the sector where they've had far more. Now, clearly in our own compensation policy, we're not going to try and get to those levels, but we're trying to come to some kind of compromise between what our current statement says, which is £25 for a service failure, that we know that the Housing Ombudsman is saying that's just out of date. And we're trying to find some balance. So we are going to go to our residents. I'll remind me if we've already been about our compensation policy, but it's in draft. It's been through the senior management team for comments, and obviously it'll be making its way to Councillor Irvine at some point soon as well.
Yep, just on that, it hasn't gone out for consultation yet. I think our sort of colleagues at TLAP will be very interested to see it, because I think their overriding point really is the discrepancy, not necessarily the amount. So in some instances, they feel that the compensation is too high. In others, they feel that the issue could have been averted and a fair redress made sooner. I think something that's quite interesting from the report is that more often than not, the complaint has been upheld at stage 1, but it still reaches stage 2. And one of the reasons is I think because there's perhaps a lack of confidence or training at the front end, where people don't feel that they've really been fairly recompensed. One of the overriding thrusts of the policy also is about the need to protect public finances, to only make compensation awards where they're fair and justified, and there is a proportionality to it. Sometimes you might find that somebody will find 10 service failures and award an amount for each of them. In the policy, there are kind of thresholds and broad limits based upon what level of responsibility is ours for and what level of impact there is on the customer. So it gives an opportunity to sort of balance those factors out, whereas I think at the moment it's a little bit more arbitrary. So I think that's the key issue that I think TLAP would like to see resolved.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report as well. Again, very, very comprehensive and an interesting read for everyone, I would say. Just a few points on page 56 and other pages, really. We've been underperforming in terms of dealing with stage 1 complaints within the prescribed timescale. There's an explanation here around departure of key staff, but our percentage figures, even after improvement in Q4, we were only dealing with 61% of stage 1 complaints within the required timescale. And I made a point earlier on the previous item that our initial reaction to a customer engagement, housing or anything, can really sensitise them to our subsequent actions. And if we get it wrong at stage 1 and we're this slow, we could actually be increasing the migration of complaints to stage 2 through that first response. Actually, it's a second response because, of course, any complaint gets an automatic response, an immediate one, through our technology, of course. But this delay here, so I got several questions around this. Is there a case for some kind of rebalancing or redeployment of existing resources to accelerate the response to stage 1? And secondly, what's the root cause for us not being able to maintain a kind of adequate staffing establishment to meet the stage 1 targets? Is it recruitment? I wouldn't have thought it's resources, because we've got a later report on today's agenda which shows a transfer to reserves in the housing revenue account. So it doesn't sound like it's necessarily a financial resourcing issue. So I think that's quite an important point. Also on page 57, you've recognised that there's this kind of outlier in that our surveyors in South, our South surveyors as compared to East and West, seem to have a significantly greater workload in terms of investigating complaints, and you've rightly identified a need to research this and identify why. And then there's the Code of Practice table, and I'll give a reference number for it, 5.14, which addresses unreasonably persistent and vexatious complainants. And this is a sensitive topic, of course. But where you have genuinely unreasonable and unreasonably persistent or vexatious complainants, it is clearly right, as per code of practice, to identify them and to act appropriately. And one of the reasons for doing that, of course, is because such complainants use up a disproportionate amount of council resource and impact resource from the vast majority of complainants who are totally reasonable and right to complain to us. So I think what might be missing from this report is a kind of impact analysis, because the people I'm referring to are perhaps few and far between, but because they are, it might be not too difficult to kind of identify the resource they're pulling away from the vast majority of our customer base. And I think that would be worthwhile to encourage our people to action this aspect of policy around unreasonable and vexatious complaints. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, just to acknowledge for the teams, you say with the amount transferred to reserves, surely it can't be a resource issue. Obviously, the HRA's got a lot to achieve, decarbonisation, maintaining our stock, building new homes. So we do need to protect our resources. We're also repaying the cost of the debt from the 2012 exercise as well. So there is a lot for the HRA to achieve. So obviously we do need to consider how we use resources. But last year we did have a growth item, and one of those growth items was a complaints and disrepair manager that will sit in the responsive repairs service, which is where the majority of complaints are held. We're about to go into the formal period for the consultation on that restructure now, so I don't expect it's going to be too longer until we actually get that dedicated resource in. They will primarily deal with stage 1 complaints, and they will also do disrepair. They will also assist me with stage 2 complaints, but obviously because they will be doing stage 1, they can't prejudice the stage 2 process. It needs to be independent at stage 2, so there will still be input from me, but the hope is that with a dedicated manager, we will get the complaint right first time rather than it escalating. But I think it is fair to say that aside from all of that, last year there were issues with volume. We've seen complaints going up, and obviously that's a lot to do with a lot of attention that the sector's got, as well as a lot of PR campaigns that the Housing Ombudsman, for example, has undertaken. So there is absolutely no doubt that volume has increased. We have to remember that currently it's the surveyors that will deal with, for example, in repairs. Again, I've already said that's where the highest number of complaints are. It is the surveyors that will be investigating and responding to those complaints. And if we put that in the context of a vast increase in other areas of work that they've had over the last few years, namely damp and mould, the workload around damp and mould has tripled, if not quadrupled. So put it in that context and put it against them also dealing with a rising complaint. There are and absolutely have been resource issues, although I do acknowledge, particularly in the South team, there were issues. One member of staff who's left, there was certainly some performance issues there. We've got a new team in the South team, so it'll be interesting to see how that translates over the next year and what that now looks like. As a senior management team, we have worked really hard, and we continue to work really hard to generate the right culture around complaints, making sure that all of our teams understand how important it is. At various points in the year, we've had quite low performance in terms of our teams responding to the complainant within 5 days to explore more about what the complaint's about. The team have worked really hard to reinforce that, and we are now in a really good place with that, with only a few anomalies. And our next step really is to impress that we've also got to, as well as that initial call, we've got to be getting the complaint out the door within the required time and or extending it if we cannot. There are weekly meetings that happen, particularly in the responsive repairs teams, where they are actively performance managing that. As a senior management team, we look at complaints every month, but we also have a quarterly report. Councillor Ian Irvine also gets complaint reports every month, and we do a digest in the portfolio space as well. So there is a lot of attention around getting the complaint handling code right. In terms of vexatious complainants, Georgia, you've obviously done a lot of work around the data. I can honestly say at stage 2 that maybe there's only been potentially 1 or 2 vexatious complainants coming up to stage 2 in the last year or so. Georgia, do you want to add anything more about stage 1 complainants and the trends that you might have seen?
Yeah, I would say that vexatious complaints aren't really an issue in terms of the data set that we've received. So of the 378 odd complaints there were, I think there are fewer than 5, I would say, who've made more than 1 complaint. There are 5 or so people who've had cause to complain, and some of those complaints have been withdrawn, so aren't included in the figures. So I would say it's not really a significant issue for us, vexatious complaining.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I also have another job title now. I'm the member with responsibility for complaints. And what that means is that I have responsibility for making sure that the Cabinet, as the governing body of the Council, receives regular information on the level of complaints in Crawley homes, and that's something which we will be enacting very, very shortly.
Yeah, I'll document those in the minutes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Making complaints, sorry, thank you. People making complaints directly to the council through contacting their councillor. Is that through are these complaints through contacting councillors, or are they directly from people phoning the council to complain, or is it both ways?
Thank you, Councillor Ayling. The report covers formal complaints. Sometimes members' inquiries can escalate to complaints, as I explained to you before as well, but for the purposes of the committee, equally sometimes we have MP inquiries that come in and they're logged as complaints depending on what the nature is. If somebody says, and if the narrative that we get says somebody wants to make a complaint, then actually that's the trigger that something actually becomes a complaint and is logged as a formal complaint. So it's all formal complaints, it's not members' inquiries unless there's expressly stated that it's something that is to be escalated as a complaint. But these are formal complaints that could come in via the online complaint form. They could be taken verbally over the phone because somebody's expressed that they want to make a formal complaint. Could come in writing, but yeah, they're formal complaints rather than member inquiries.
Thank you. Right, I think everyone's had the opportunity to ask questions. Councillor Burgess, do you have any questions? No, the questions I was going to ask have been asked. Okay, thank you. I move that the Commission notes the report and requests that the views expressed during the debate are fed back to the Cabinet through the Commission's comment sheet, and ask that the Vice Chair seconds it, please.
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. Right, item 7 is Cabinet Members' discussion. I'm pleased to welcome Councillor Irvine to update the Commission on the housing portfolio and the roles and his roles and responsibilities. I'll hand over to Councillor Irvine prior to the Commission wanting to ask any questions.
Thank you, Chair. Rather than waffle on with a big long introduction, I'd like to ask if anyone's got any questions.
anyone have any? Do any members have any questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Lanza.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Ivan, for your written submission on your responsibilities. Just one initial question. I think it's quite topical in view of recent events, but particularly from the point of view of the potential for housing delivery of all types for Crawley people. What is your current view on the proposed West of Ifield development?
Well, my personal view, and this is that first of all, I'm not sure how much influence we have over it, but secondly, if that development did go ahead, then I would be hopeful that there would be a large percentage of the housing allocated as social or affordable housing, and that Crawley Council would get a good amount of nomination rights to those properties, because if that happened, given the proposed size of that new development, then that would take a lot of pressure off our housing waiting list.
Hello. I wanted to ask a question about the modular housing project. I know it's been talked about, and I haven't really heard anything for almost a year. So I just wanted to ask if you have any updates on the modular housing project.
To be quite frank with you, Chair, at my briefing meetings, I've frequently uttered my disappointment at the length of time this project is taking. I mean, by the time it comes to fruition, if it comes to fruition, it will have taken about 4.5 years. And, when we first proposed it, the idea was that we were doing something quick to relieve the pressure on, our council finances for providing homelessness and also providing extra a decent accommodation for people who are homeless. 4.5 years seems to be a long time, but it's kind of out of my hands at the moment because it has to go through the planning process. So I really do hope that the new Labour government will do what it says and speed up the planning process.
Yeah, so my follow-up question would be, so can you confirm that one of the reasons why this project has taken so long because of the bureaucracy of the planning development?
Well, I can't say that is actually for sure. There could be a lot of different factors involved in why it's taken so long. I mean, there has been extensive consultation with residents, which is only right and proper. And interestingly enough, I believe the final application won't be submitted by this council, it'll actually be submitted by the organisation which provides the property. I don't want to prejudice proceedings really, because we'll have to go to the planning committee, which I'm hopeful will be going this autumn. But even after the planning committee, if the planning permission is granted, it will still take some time to come into force.
Yeah, I'm sure I've got some questions. It's covered in the next area, but obviously we declared, as the council declared her house and Moses in February before I got elected to the council, and obviously the right thing to do. And I think from all our casework, we are seeing how things much are stretched. Have you actually heard back did you actually hear back from the government on the letter you wrote? You and Michael wrote jointly as leader. And is there any progress on some of the issues? Obviously they're covered in the next agenda item on the housing allowance being kept at 2011 levels, and obviously I hope we're waiting for some money to come in concerning the Gossians, but have we had any reply yet?
I personally haven't seen a reply. The leader may have, but just on that, I mean, obviously that was an action in lobbying government. tomorrow I'm going up to London to Central Hall in Westminster to the launch of a report which is going to government called The Future of Council Housing, and this is a report which is supported by over 100 housing authorities across the country, and it's calling on the government to do various things to enable councils to provide more council housing and to improve the state of some of the housing revenue accounts, which, unlike ours, aren't doing so well up and down the country. That report will be published. It's quite a long report. I think it's got 71 pages and lots and lots of recommendations, but 5 key recommendations. If you're interested in housing, I do urge you to read it. And it's not something designed to be critical of the government. It's something designed to sort of try and influence the government into enabling local authorities like ours to do our housing jobs even better and provide more housing for people for the future.
It actually is kind of, thank you, Councillor Irvine, for that extensive reply. It actually also covered in the next item on the budget and stuff, but in terms of the challenges facing us, do you think things will get better in terms of our immediate housing emergency and housing crisis? And there are, I know there's a number of factors involved, and what do you think some of the key factors are?
Well, earlier I said that, you see, I spent today kind of brainstorming myself as to what questions might come up. And of course, none of the questions I thought of have come up. But one of the questions I thought of was someone might ask me, what do you like best about being a Cabinet Member for Housing? And I, of course, would answer, coming to the Overview and Scrutiny Commission to discuss with my fellow council housing issue. And also said that I have 2 missions in my mind, and one of which is to try and do my bit to make sure that Crawley Homes is regarded as a first-class housing authority. The other mission is to ensure that while we grapple with the issue of homelessness, that we do so in a way which is caring to the people who are afflicted by homelessness, and which, and striving at the same time to reduce the costs that we've got on the council as regards homelessness. And in actual fact, at the moment, our present homelessness situation isn't getting massively better, but it's not getting massively worse. For example, we've had no families in bed and breakfast for over 6 weeks, despite all the challenges. We've prevented homelessness for 61% of households who have approached us during Q1. I got all these figures earlier from the head of homelessness. But on the other hand, we've got 2,534 people on the housing register, and that number is continuing to increase. And we've got a significant reduction in the number of properties available for letting. So there are a lot of challenges for us. But even so, we're still bringing forward, I think, some quite interesting projects. And there's one I want to share with you, because it really does kind of, it kind of moves the stuff of which I became a councillor for. And the idea is that we allocate up to 5 properties, flats per year, to people who've been perhaps living out on the streets, and in return for getting a temporary tenancy, they would get intensive care, skilled care, to enable them to cope with their day-to-day living. Could be getting a job, it could be completing forms, it could be all sorts of different aspects of household management, and that to me would be an incredibly worthwhile project. It would mean this council not just providing something, but also ensuring that some people can actually turn their lives around. And that project at the moment is still in its infancy, but I'm confident that it will be coming forward soon. So I would hope that you would support that.
Does anyone else have any questions? Do you want
One
a
more.
follow-up question?
One more. We've had a lot of discussion about mould tonight, actually, in the Crawley homes. Why? And obviously, even before as a council I was aware of as an issue, I haven't had any particular myself since May. why do you think that's such an issue in the last year? Is it because of what happened with the little boy in Rochdale, or is it other stuff going on within our society? It's quite interesting that it's the one thing which has come out from the housing survey and we spoke today. I'm just quite interested in why it's happening at the moment.
I think there's probably another number of factors. Probably, first of all, as you quite rightly say, that tragedy that happened in Rochdale has sparked a lot of concern. Now, claims companies also got involved in this. Now, my last job before I took semi-retirement was as a payment protection insurance complaints handler, which actually was more interesting than it sounded initially anyway. But even in that, you got a huge volume of speculative complaints. Now, I'm not saying this is the same for damp and mould cases, but in both instances you had claims companies involved. So there might be some speculative complaints coming through. I think also, and I say this tentatively because I don't want to discourage anyone from making a complaint about damp and mould. I don't want to say that their complaint isn't justified, but sometimes damp and mould can be down to other issues. For example, condensation. People dry their homes drying their clothes inside their house, or perhaps not being able to afford to put on the heating because, as you know, there are problems with people affording heating, and that, in many instances, Crawley Homes have provided people with dehumidifiers to try and cope with that. So that's my belief, and also I think that maybe people feel more confident about complaining, because I would hate us to be an organisation where there was a culture of tenants being unwilling to complain for whatever reason. Maybe they might be afraid to complain for whatever reason. At least we are open to receiving complaints. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
Thank you, Councillor Irvine. Yeah, I mean, I'd agree exactly. Cost of living has had a big impact on the ability for people to heat their homes. We've seen that time and time again. Obviously, to prevent damp mould condensation, it's the balance of getting your ventilation and heating right. There are some homes where we are looking to the structure to find a root cause, and we are finding water tracking in, for example. So there are genuinely sometimes issues around our stock. Our stock is aging. If you look at the age profile, we are going to see issues coming. We've obviously done a lot of work around external wall insulation, cavity wall insulation, so we're helping people to heat their homes better, but absolutely some of it will be around cost of living. Ian's right, Councillor Irvine is right, there is a lifestyle issue. We're not really allowed to refer to it in that way, but we need to help educate people, because we do see people frequently drying their clothes. That is creating extra vapour in the air that is causing condensation that can be the root cause of damp and mould. But equally, I think you're right. You asked about, is there just a greater awareness? Yes, there is. We've all heard about the story of our Ishak, and it's devastating. And, people are aware to that. Plus also, and I referenced earlier, the Housing Ombudsman is doing more work around encouraging people to complain and to complain to their landlord when something isn't right. But we've also seen other things like, I think ITV and ITN have done some big news stories, haven't they, on kind of damp and mould and some of those kind of issues. So there's definitely more awareness in the sector.
Please just say no.
Thank you, Chair. I think your microphone wasn't on again, but we'll overlook at it. Well, I don't mind. I can hear you, Chair, but I suspect people at home can't. But okay, just to introduce this quarter, then 2024-25 continues to be challenging financially for the council, and the forecast at quarter one is comprised of a large number of variations, with the detail contained within the report, which hopefully everyone's had a chance to read. Starting with the general fund, the forecast outturn expenditure at the moment is broadly neutral at £115,000 over budget. Now, given previous quarters and our experience of mounting costs recently, I hope members will agree with my judgment that this is a relatively modest figure in comparison to some of the figures that we were receiving in previous quarters. So temporary accommodation continues to be the main area of service expenditure over which the council has no direct control. I believe I am correct in saying that the number of households now in temporary accommodation are some of the highest they've ever been. Councillor Irvine earlier on outlined some of the very successful ways we've taken the sting out of these increases, Chair, and I think from what he said, some very impressive achievements given the pressures on the council. But I think the point needs to be made on a financial level, not of course losing sight of the human costs here, is that although the increases are no longer as steep as they might have been in previous quarters, previous years, just because they're levelling out doesn't mean that the figures still aren't very high, and the concurrent costs for the council. And I think the other thing that's worth pointing out as well is once people are in temporary accommodation, there's a difficulty if you don't have anywhere to move them onto, that you will continue to pay those temporary accommodation costs because you haven't got any alternative option, and the people in there don't have any other option for the most part. Gross expenditure for this is predicted to be about £1 million above the original budget, but this is anticipated to be mitigated through better recovery of housing benefit and grants. But as a demand-led service, is going to continue to be monitored closely. Members will already be aware from the 23-24 outturn report that the council employed a specialist ratings advisor to take the old town hall site out of ratings, and this was unfortunately refused by the valuation office. Work is continuing to explore mitigations on that, including hopefully a decision on whether we will receive a grant from the government towards the costs of dealing with the site. But that's yet to come unless there's news I'm not aware of. So I think that's where I want to leave it there. But saying that in terms of the old town hall, but clearly we do have additional costs associated with that we really didn't envisage we were going to have, because we thought the deal that we originally had to transfer the land was going to take place, and obviously that's now not happening. The budget assumes a pay award of 3.5% for staff on the NJC scales. The employer's offer that was made was in line with the budget, but that's yet to reach agreement. So if say a higher pay award was ultimately agreed instead, say 5% rather than 3.5%, that would result in additional budget pressure of about £314,000. But of course, we're not there yet, so we won't know until later in the year precisely what that rise will be. I suppose the largest positive variation, Chair, is that we're £816,000 better off, I think, on interest on investments than we anticipated. This is partly due to larger balances being available due to slippage in the capital programme, but interest rates have remained higher for longer, and the council has taken advantage of some longer term deals to lock into those higher rates, which are again, I think I said this last time, but all credit to the internal team who's achieved those returns for us. It's certainly made a big difference with all the other pressures that are taking place. To cover the housing revenue account briefly, the outturn for the HRA, it's anticipated to be 151,000 over budget, which means that is resulting in a lower transfer to balances at the end of the year, but as was indicated by Amanda Kendall earlier on, there are a range of demands on the HRA which we need to take into account. So we are looking at this closely. I think the other thing just to draw your attention to, Chair, is that the report also highlights an error in the figure quoted for the HRA balance on the 31st of March, because it doesn't reflect the loan repayment that was made. And as members will know now, there is a sizable sum which we have to repay annually to the government, which we began to repay in the last couple of years, I think I'm right in saying. I still think it is an outrageous liberty for the government to be charging us this, and if we didn't have to repay this money, that we were was the only way, was a condition, the condition we would get to actually have full ownership of the stock ourselves. I think it's right to describe it that way. Then we could actually be using this amount in repayment. We could be using it, investing in council homes for the future. And I think one of the things the cabinet member will be doing when he goes on the train tomorrow is making similar points as part of the wider package, which is being called for by councils from across the country. I think it's also worth pointing out that the right to buy receipts remain at the low levels experienced in 23-24, and although that does mean that we retain the stock, it also means that we have less money at our immediate disposal to spend on building new council housing. And there has been some slippage in the capital programme, and although progress has been made with HRA acquisition scheme, and we hope to move that forward even further in the near future, there has been some slippage. Much of this is attributable to the delays that water neutrality have caused our capital programme, I think it's fair to say, but we will be making efforts to address any other factors in the meantime that might be holding things up. And the final thing to say just is about reserves. The general fund reserve is predicted to go below the £3 million number which the council sets itself. Although it should be remembered this is an internally set minimum. Experience from previous financial years shows that in-year mitigations are frequently required. So we always look to try and maintain it as near to that £3 million level, but the level that it will end up at the end of the year will largely depend on things like the outcome of the ratings appeal and the mitigations and the final pay awards, and indeed how severe the temporary accommodation issue continues to be. So I am satisfied that for the most part the demands on us are we have kept a good handle on what is foreseeable, but of course there always remains that issue that something may arise that is not at this time foreseeable, and temporary accommodation of course remains one of those things. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. I'll now open it up to questions and the discussion. Do any councillors have any questions, please? Councillor Lanza.
Well, thank you, Councillor Jones and officers for that report, first of all. And I think congratulations to the Treasury Management team on achieving that additional interest outturn of £816,000, which is very useful. I just want to make a few points. So on page 104, paragraph 5.10.1, this refers to the business rates on the new town hall. And I've always been a supporter of the town hall we're in. I spoke in favour of it, and I voted in favour of it when it was first conceived. So I've no problem with it, and it's great we've got some tenants. But with this paragraph, I think our general public in Crawley would expect that if anyone's an expert on business rates, it should be Crawley Borough Council as a responsible local authority. So it looks like in 5.10.1 we've been taken by surprise somewhat with an overspend of £575,000. And it will be surprising to our residents that this council can be taken by surprise. And I think there's a question which you might not be able to answer in public part A, but that amount of money in terms of additional business rates, how does it compare to the amount of additional rental income we're getting, which is higher than we expected? Because if that ratio is a poor one, like 1 to 1, it doesn't sound very, very good at all. And when we go to now, please, page 405 and paragraph 7.2, housing revenue account variances. And we've got the 2024-25 repayment of the Public Works Loan Board. And that was a loan, I think, of about £248 million over many years, which was agreed in 2012. And what we're seeing here is that repayment of £13 million of that loan in financial year 2024-25 was omitted from the Q4 2023-24 budget monitoring report. And again, I think our residents would expect this council to have the kind of, they would be surprised that we omitted such a large loan repayment from a budget monitoring report in the last quarter of the last financial year. I mean, I might be annoyed with myself, to be candid, for not spotting it as well in that last quarter. Now, you said, Councillor James, you expressed some reservations that we were having to repay that loan, but that loan was designed and achieved an exit from the housing revenue account subsidy regime. It was a payment to central government, and as profiled at the time, it signalled the ability to, in fact, invest more in our housing stock by virtue of having exiting that subsidy regime. And also at the time, despite your mild criticism of that decision now, your political group supported that decision to take out that loan to exit the housing revenue account subsidy regime. And I hope I'm not misquoting him, but I think our MP now, who was Peter Lamb, who was leader of the opposition in 2012, put the view in public that it seemed like a sensible decision to make. So I think your retrospective criticism carries a great deal less weight than had it been made at the time of the decision, when in fact you and your group supported the decision that I signed off for that loan. Thank you.
Very happy to respond, Chair. I think Councillor Lanza raises a fair point about the rateable values. Now, the rateable values of the unoccupied floors of the Crate building issued by the Valuation Office have come in substantially higher than anticipated. Now, some of that is a reflection of where the commercial value of the floors have been higher than was originally anticipated. The council will be engaging a rating specialist to appeal the rateable values and are currently instigating additional mitigations. Both with this and indeed the old town hall site, I'm not especially happy with some of the decisions that have been reached by the Valuation Office. I don't think that's unfair description of my feelings, but also we were given some fairly clear advice about what was expected to be the decision of the Valuation Office based on expert advice, which it doesn't appear that the Valuation Office has come down on. Now, whether that's because there was a standing instruction from probably the last government to maximise revenue, then I don't want to speculate. But saying that, some of the decisions have been a little more curious than we were expecting, and we do intend to press the point on that. I think on the issue about the HRA and the debt repayment, it was an oversight. The debt itself was still paid at the right time, and I have received reassurances that this will be rectified this year and future years, and it will not be omitted for any reason. And it is regrettable, but materially it hasn't affected anything. But clearly we want to document what happens when it happens, and that will happen in future. I suppose, Councillor Lanza, if you want to have a cup of tea, we can take it offline, our debate over the rights and wrongs of this. But effectively, that debt, I felt then and I feel now, is we're paying money for something we already owned, quite honestly. Yes, we didn't oppose the decision at the time, we supported it, but that was because we felt we had no choice given the restraints and indeed the potential disadvantages of the council of not taking this debt on at the time. So I wouldn't want us to quite rewrite or retrospectively re-represent what I thought at the time, because that wouldn't be fair on either of us. But it still remains the case that, in my view, we have a massive challenge facing us in the future in terms of housing the residents that we have here now, and anything that we can do to make that easier for councils as one of the major social housing providers has to be the right thing, given the scale and the urgency of what's required.
Just a couple, Chair.
Yeah, you're on.
I'm on. In terms of 5.63, obviously things progressed since the last OSC meeting in terms of new burdens funded. I note that we've yet to receive any payment yet for any of that. Is that developing still? That's my first question.
Any news?
Any news?
Green.
I can clarify that we've received a query, but no actual money from the government as yet. The problem we've had, and it is frustrating because even after the money was supposedly announced by the government, they've had months, if not years, to sort out a process to pay it. My understanding is, despite that, there still remains no facility to actually issue the payment, and the government is still working that through. Again, I don't blame the current government because they've been in for 8 weeks now? This is something that should have been sorted out before that. But ultimately, we are submitting claims. There's no indication yet, as far as I'm aware, that there's any issue with actually paying it. It's just an issue of when we'll get the money. But obviously, I won't feel particularly relaxed about it until the money is sitting in our account.
Just one further question. It wouldn't be remiss if I didn't mention 8.5, HOA Forward Phase 4. I couldn't remember if there was a standing item in previous quarters. I hadn't seen the last one in terms of the developments of the land and dwellings related to Forward Phase 4. Is there any progress on that? Or is there just going to be a standing item until it all happens? The Fallswood Phase 4 project, sorry, on item 8.5.
So I'm quoting. I'm just the standing item. Sorry, is the bit. I'm just querying. I mean, where we are with this is there's a number of kind of planning conditions that need to be met for that to go forward at the moment, and that's very much in play, but not one I can comment on publicly.
I believe it's connected to the sort of the link to the motorway, Chair. So, but that's all I can tell you at the moment.
Thank you very much for the report. Just a couple of observations. One about the investment interest income. So with the interest rate now start going down, we will be expecting this to go down, I mean, in the future. And also with regard to our TA budget, is continuously going up every year. How we expect, I mean, for 24-25, we are saying it will go down by 1 million. How we expect that to go down when, you know, the trend is for last many years, it's been going up every year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. To start with the investment income, we don't expect that to go down this year. That's the forecast for this year, and we've got quite a few deals that will stretch this year, and some will stretch into next year, which means that we'll be able to keep some of that level up, but we do expect balances to reduce, and we do expect interest rates to reduce. So yes, they will go down next year and in future years. Now, the question about TA, was that to do with table 5.6.4? Yes. Okay, the reason that in the budget we reduced the expenditure is because we had in-house schemes coming online. So we sort of set ourselves a stretch target, assuming that rates weren't going to rise exponentially. So that sort of assumes a reasonable increase with having sort of cheaper accommodation that we're providing ourselves. And I think Ian's keen to jump in.
Yeah, so over with this, it's quite a complicated formula as to kind of what constitutes the cost. So it's not just about numbers. It's numbers, it's the type of accommodation, it's the price of the accommodation, it's the length of stay within the accommodation, but it's also the funding sources behind the accommodation that actually come to the overall. So there's a number of kind of things in play of making sure that we're getting the absolute best value that we can in terms of putting it in. But you are right, the overall numbers are going, so even once those savings are baked in and assuming that we do meet that target, which is a demanding one for this year, then it's a dip in the overall trend, and we can expect it to probably start to weak up again unless we can do something kind of significant in that space.
Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose it's just to answer the part Councillor Ashraf's question about what do we do about the increasing costs to us, the overspend. Clearly, there are pressures on the council. It can't go on. It can't go on forever. I mean, fundamentally, I repeat what we've said before. The government has to increase the rate of housing benefit subsidy from prices which are still set at 2011 levels. It's just a ridiculous state of affairs. That's not a realistic amount to base any assistance to us, because 2011 costs are not what housing costs now, far from it. And we will be repeating that call repeatedly, but it is something fundamentally across the whole local government sector our colleagues should be saying as well, because it will apply perhaps not as acutely in some areas, but certainly more just as much, if not more acutely, in others.
All committee members had the opportunity to speak, so we'll move on to the recommendation. I move that the Commission notes the report and requests that the views expressed during the debate are fed back to the Cabinet through the Commission's comment sheet, and ask the Vice Chair to second, please.
Yes, I second that.
Thank you. recommendations are agreed. Thank you. Item 9, forthcoming discussion list. The forthcoming discussion list is featured on your agenda and also on the council's website. I will ask Heather to list those that have been referred. Thank you, Heather.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, so the following items are heading to the Cabinet on the 2nd of October, so they will feature to the Commission if you wish to refer them on the 30th of September. There is a change to those printed on the agenda. The Crawley Innovation Centre has been deferred, so the following items are heading to Cabinet on the 2nd of October. Currently, Crawley Borough Local Plan, Tilgate Youth Centre redevelopment, approval of scheme budget and authority to appoint a contractor, and housing acquisitions and future delivery. There is potential, should the local plan go to Cabinet on the 2nd of October, the Commission may wish to consider requesting the Cabinet member for planning and economic development to be invited for the Cabinet member discussion at the same time, should you wish to consider that. So please can you let me know should you wish to have any reports. I would add that the local plan will be coming anyway, because it's a PFD. Policy framework document. So basically, Commission has no choice and it has to come anyway.
Does anyone have anything they would like to add to the discussion list?
I would like to give you Tilgate. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we would like the Cabinet member to come to that meeting, if that's okay. Does everyone agree to that? Yep. Okay, thank you. Right, there is no supplementary agenda items. With the business of the Overall Scrutiny Commission of the 2nd of September concluded, the meeting is now closed at 9:09 or 21:09. Thank you.